Okay, thank you, sir. Right, so like Sir just said, we are going to look at remarkable Black women today and trailblazers who shaped and continue to shape Britain. And the reason I planned this assembly was out of sheer frustration, really. Um, we all know what's happening in the media. A lot of it is negative. We need to celebrate. There are lots of great things that the Black community have contributed to Britain. And particularly, I want us to focus and start with Black women. So welcome. Thank you all for joining. Remember, if you wish to ask questions or comments, submit them through the Q&A tab at the bottom of the page. Please make sure that any comments or questions are formal, respectful, as you can imagine. And as you know, this is a really sensitive topic. So if you don't ask questions that fit the guidelines, we won't be able to use them, and it will be such a shame. So like I said, I planned this out of frustration because sometimes we find with our community that as British people, we suffer from selective amnesia when we acknowledge Black history. We often exclude, or there is a lack of acknowledgement of the significant contributions we made to Britain. I'm going to give you some now. So did you know that we helped Britain during both wars? Did you know that a significant portion of British wealth came from the sugar and cotton plantations in the Caribbean? Did you know that there was once a British civil rights movement and a bus boycott in Bristol? Did you know that we were here long before slavery and Empire Windrush? Did you know that Black people contribute 30 billion to the economy? And even though we're only 3% of the population, we've contributed so much in terms of literature, STEM, art, sports, politics, music, education. 3% of the population, boys, and we've done all that. If you don't know where you've come from, you're never going to know where you're going. Okay, and this is why it's so important to me and to lots of your teachers that you understand your history, yeah, our history, because Black history is actually world history. And I want to start by just showing you this short clip from David Olusogun. If you don't know who he is, get to know. He is one of the best historians.
The place of Black people in British.
1 second. He is one of the best historians in Britain. And he's got a really interesting life story, and he does lots and lots for Black history. So I'm starting with this clip because, as we know, context is important. We tell you in all of your English lessons. Black history didn't just have an impact in America, it had one here too. And Black people in history have existed for centuries. We've been pioneers, we've been icons, and we've made significant contributions. So I'm going to stop talking for a second and just have a watch of this video.
The place of Black people in British history is sometimes thought of as a story that begins with the arrival of the Windrush. In reality, the Windrush is just one chapter in a much longer history. Black people have been living in this country for centuries, and the story of the Black presence in the United Kingdom goes back all the way to Roman times. This is old history, the history that you don't learn at school. When I was 16, I went into a bookshop and I bought this book, Staying Power by Peter Fryer. And to Black British people of my generation, this was the most important book in the world, because what it did was it showed us that we weren't new arrivals, but that we were part of a longer, deeper history that went back centuries. Because we're not telling key moments in British history, whole aspects of the story of Britain are simply being left out of the picture. And I think it's time that changed. That phrase, Black British, that we're really used to today, I never heard that when I was growing up. To be Black and to be British, well, they were two separate things. You couldn't really be both. To be Black was not really to to be British. And it was the history, it was books like Staying Power by Peter Fryer that showed me that there'd always been Black British people.
Black British history is so diverse. It's just kind of a shame that at a young age, you can't really participate and celebrate in your identity. How can you not want to learn about your past because you can't go forward without understanding your past?
When I talk to young Black people, what they tell me is that they are as desperate as I was when I was their age to learn more about the longer history of the Black presence in Britain, and that history is still not being taught to them at school.
When it came to learning about Black history, it was mainly pumped within a month of something that should have been a year consistently. And it was kind of ranging from Mary Seacole to Nelson Mandela, Martin Luther King.
What a lot of people are taught at school are the biographies of individual Black people. And there's lots of good stuff that comes out of that. It's really great that kids now learn about Mary Seacole and they learn about Walter Tull. That's great, and I haven't got a problem with it. But if you only do that, what you find is you just create these isolated Black characters, and what you don't learn about are the forces that led Britain to interact with Africa, interact with Africans. You don't learn about just how important the sugar slavery economy was in the 17th and 18th and early 19th centuries. We don't learn that Britain's relationship with the United States, economic relationship after the American War of Independence and right up to the Civil War, is founded on cotton, and that cotton is produced by African Americans, enslaved African Americans.
We're kind of told in a way that these things didn't happen in the UK, and we're told that certain things like this happened within America, and you know, it wasn't on our soil, and we treated Black people great and well, and we provided all these things for them, when in the reality there was no difference.
It's great that we learn today about the biographies of individual Black figures from the past, and those stories were important to me when I was growing up. But what we seem still to neglect are exploring other issues, things like the development of racial thinking in the 18th and 19th centuries, or the centrality of slavery to the British economy. Black history is more than just biographies. It is fundamental to understanding British history because it is a fundamental part of British history.
I don't know if this whole exclusionary history is like a nod to empire, laziness, or they just don't really care about Black people, people of colour, working class, or women in general. I just don't know.
What the new science is proving is that there were Afro-Romans living in Britain. There are people who find it challenging, even threatening, that Black people have been in Britain since Roman times. There are people who feel the need, when this is discussed online, to go on Twitter, to go on social media and discredit these ideas. There are people who would rather deny the facts than confront the quite simple, uncontroversial, in my view, reality, is that Britain was part of the Roman Empire and the Roman Empire was multiracial. One of the best examples is the Ivory Bangle Lady. She was a middle-class Afro-Roman living in 4th century York. We know she was African because of the tests that have been done on her remains and because among her possessions was a bracelet made of African ivory. John Blank was a trumpeter in the court of the Tudors, in the court of Henry VIII, and he is the first Black Briton for whom we have not just a name and evidence from the archives, we have his picture. He appears on a document called the 1511 Westminster Tournament Roll. He is the first Black Briton whose name we can give a face to. That makes him really special. Among the documents that tell us something of the life of John Blank is a petition that he had written demanding a pay rise. Now, he's sending this petition to his boss, to Henry VIII. What that tells us is that this is somebody who values themselves. This is somebody who understands that their skills are worth something, and he's willing to stick his neck out and demand a pay rise from Henry VIII, and he gets his pay rise. When I was at school, I was taught about the Act of Abolition, that Britain freed the slaves. What I wasn't told was that Britain also compensated the slave owners to the tune £20 million. Now that's around £17 billion today. Slavery wasn't just abolished, the slave owners were compensated for their loss of property human property. There was another part of the act of abolition that I didn't learn at school. What I wasn't taught was that the former slaves weren't freed immediately. They were made to work 45 hours a week for the next 4 to 6 years for their former owner in a system that was called apprenticeship.
Okay, so I hope you all learned something from that. And what I would like you to do is just note some of your thoughts in the chat. So I know there's a bit of a delay, so I'll give you a bit of time. What did you find interesting that he said?
So we're just waiting for the comments to come in, Miss. As you know, yeah, there is this delay on the line, and so yeah, we'll just give the boys a few moments to come up with their contributions and think through what they want to say. But my personal view there is yeah, I think it's very interesting the general point he was making about not necessarily just looking at individual characters from Black history, but seeing the bigger picture of how there was whole significant movements and different aspects of Black history that have been kind of maybe left out of the curriculum in the past that need to be addressed now. So not just to look at things in isolation, but to look at whole changes that took place over time. So yeah, very interesting. And that last bit there about what happened after the abolition of slavery was quite shocking. The amount of money that was paid to the slave owners, 17 billion, I think it was, in today's terms. Yeah, quite a lot of money.
And funnily enough, sir, oh, it's gone a bit too far. Funnily enough, sir, one of the people who benefited from his family getting paid was David Cameron. So, and it was only up until 2015 that the payments to his family stopped. See, this is why it's so important, boys, that we know this. These are the people who are making decisions about us and our families and the country. Think about the legacy that they've had.
Okay, we've got a comment here, Miss.
Yep.
Guy said, I never knew Black people lived in Europe in the Roman era.
Yeah.
That's exciting, new knowledge.
We're going to look at the Ivory Bangle Lady in a little bit more detail in a second. Thank you, Miss. Good point. Any others? Or are we happy to move on?
I think a lot of them are also quite bewildered by the 20 billion payout as well. So, yeah.
That's a whole assembly in itself, guys. I'm hoping Sir will let me do that. Right, so, like I keep saying, Black history is British history. And yet one particular group is often left out. And I know David Olusogun touched on the Ivory Bangle Lady, but I think she deserves a little bit more credit, yeah, and a little bit more understanding. So Black women, and today, that's who I want us to look at. They shaped and continue to shape Britain. They've played a central role in British history for centuries, yet women's stories in general are left untold. But with Black women, it's more frequent. So let's start with this lady, the Ivory Bangle Lady. Okay, so 4th century AD. Why is this moving so quickly? That's annoying. So in 1901, this ancient grave of a woman was discovered in York. Okay, and you would think, wow, north of England, a Black woman was discovered. And it wasn't until 100 years later that it was revealed that she was of North African descent. And she was known as the Ivory Bangle Lady. And that's because when they dug up her grave, they found elephant ivory bracelets, earrings, pendants, beads, a blue glass jug, and a glass mirror. So in other words, she wasn't poor. And there's often this assumption that as Black people, we've always been poor. We've never been aspirationally wealthy, or we've never had any kind of wealth. And that couldn't be further from the truth. People also like to believe that the first Black people in Britain arrived from the British colonies or from Africa, the Caribbean, Asia, and as slaves. That wasn't true, okay? in many cases, as David Olusogun pointed out, we have been here for centuries. It's just that after World War II, there was a big influx, okay? There is a girl who I want us to look at later, a young lady called Lavinia, and she started off what's called the Black curriculum. Like I said, we'll learn about her later. And she says, we know that Black people were in Britain since Roman times, and there's specific examples. This lady, the Ivory Bangle Lady, her remains are in York, in the York Museum. So if you ever go there, it's a beautiful place to visit anyway. Go and have a look. And when the archaeologists analysed her skeleton, it revealed that she was born in Roman Britain, and she was likely to be North African descent. The remains have been dated back to the second half of the 4th century. Okay, so can you imagine? I mean, just her story and what she experienced whilst being a wealthy Black woman in Roman Britain. I mean, wow. Okay, and that's not her, that's a computer image of what they imagine she would have looked like. Okay, so we're going to start with this lady, very significant and one of the earliest examples of Black women in Britain. Moving forward a little bit, this lady, very interesting. I loved learning about Phillis Wheatley. Phillis Wheatley, 1753 to 1784. And her expertise was literature, particularly poetry. Now, she had a very interesting life, okay? She was seized from, they don't know whether it was Senegal or Gambia, but it was definitely West Africa. Now, don't forget, very loose documentation would have been kept on slaves. And she was about 7 or 8 years old. And she was transported to the Boston docks in America with a shipment of refugee slaves who, because of their age or physical frailty, they were unsuited to rigorous labor. So because she was quite petite, she was quite small, they thought, we can't have her out doing really hard work, but she'll still be useful for us. So they didn't send her to the West Indies or the Southern colonies, which is where they usually sent young kids. They sent her to America. And she was bought by a family called the Wheatleys, hence why she's got their surname, okay? And the wife was called Susanna Wheatley, and she was married to a Boston tailor. He was very prominent, and his name was John Wheatley. And the comments say that she was a slender, frail female child. And the captain of the ship, who sold her, the captain of the slave ship, thought that she was so small that she must have been terminally ill. But he thought, you know, I need to make a little bit of money anyway. And he sold her for a small profit because he thought otherwise she's just going to die and I'm not going to make any money. A family friend of the Wheatleys said she was of a slender frame and evidently suffering from the change of climate. So you can imagine she's come from boiling hot Africa to freezing cold America. She was nearly naked, and the only bit of covering that she had on her was a bit of a carpet. I mean, isn't that awful? 7 years old. And they said the only way they knew she was about 7 years old was because she was starting to lose her front teeth. Now, sorry guys, I don't know why this keeps moving. So after discovery, when she was taken in, the family discovered that she was very precocious. So that means that she was very advanced for her age. She was very intelligent. She absorbed information really quickly. They thought, do you know what? We're going to teach her to read and write. She's got potential. Although that didn't stop her from completing all of her slave duties, her domestic duties, okay? So because she was so intelligent, they started to teach her the Bible. They taught her astronomy, they taught her geography, history, British literature, particularly, and this is very challenging works that children in grammar schools today and private schools study, John Milton, Alexander Pope, and they taught her the Greek and Latin classics. So can you imagine this girl who was almost about to die, taken from Africa, brought to America, and had such a promising intellect that they started to teach her some of these really challenging subjects. Now, what happened then was she was a literary prodigy, and in 1773 she came to London to promote her poetry collection. But unfortunately, when she came to London, she was met with a lot of discrimination, a lot of racism, and people didn't even believe the work was hers. But luckily, because of her connections through the Wheatleys, Granville Sharp, so he was later, he became famous because he later helped to abolish slavery. Granville Sharp helped to get some of her work published, and at the age of 20 she published her first book of poetry, and you can have a look at some of them on the internet. And I've just taken a quote from one of them, and it says, "Enlarge the close contracted mind and fill it with thy fire." Yeah, so open your brain and fill it with knowledge. And I absolutely love that quote. Now, her work was used as evidence that people, enslaved people, were very intelligent and they were capable of having monumental influence on the anti-slavery movement. And that is why I think it's so important that we honour and learn about Phillis Wheatley. Yes, where she came from, to what she did and what she learned. Yeah, and what she managed to contribute to literature. Okay, so obviously, as an English teacher, I would start with literature. Here's our second lady. This is Lillian Badder. Okay, and she was 1918 to 2015, so she only died recently. And at the age of 9, she was orphaned. Yeah, so she was brought up in a convent. A convent's like a church. And when the war broke out in 1939, she worked briefly as a dinner lady. She worked in the canteen of the Navy, Army and Air Force Institutes. But she was asked to leave because she was black. They said, "We don't want you to work here. We can't have people like you working here." But she didn't give up. She volunteered to join another organisation of the war, and she trained as an instrument repairer. So can you imagine these early women who were training in STEM in the 1900s? It's just phenomenal. And when she was training, while she was training, she found out that her brother, who was in the Navy, her brother died. Now, if I found out news like that, that would have broke me. But she didn't give up. Okay, she passed her course with first class, That's the highest grade you can get. And she became one of the first women in the Air Force to qualify in that trade. She kept going, she persevered, she worked long hours, and her job was checking the faults in instruments of aircrafts to allow those men who were out fighting, to allow them to do their job. And she was really good at it, guys. Eventually, she got promoted to becoming acting corporal. And after the war, she studied for a degree at London University. She became a teacher, and her sons now fly helicopters for the Royal Navy, and they've become pilots. So you can see this has been generational. And just before she died, she said this: "My father served in the First World War. His 3 children served in the Second World War. I married a man who was in the Second World War, as was his brother, and he was decorated for bravery in Burma. Their father also served in the First World War. Our son is a helicopter pilot. He served in Northern Ireland. So, all in all, I think we've given back to this country more than we've received." Absolutely, Lillian. And she was determined for the rest of her life. She was determined that the contributions of Black and Asian Britons during the war was recognised and remembered. And she told her stories of prejudice and racism to the Imperial War Museum. She told journalists, she told politicians, she told anybody who would listen. She was on numerous TV shows. And in 2002, she was invited to meet the Queen. And she passed away on the 14th of March, 2015. Very inspirational woman, okay? Another one who had nothing but came and delivered, okay? This lady, now you might have seen her on Google, on the Google search bar a couple of days ago. And that was that picture actually was drawn by a lady called Lynette Kamara, who I'm very lucky to call my mentor. So have a look at that if you can. It was on Google just last week. And why I've chosen Olive Morris, 1952 to 1979. She died very young. Yeah, she died of cancer, unfortunately. But in her very short 27 years, she contributed a lot to British society. Okay, she was an important figure in terms of civil rights. She led demonstrations and protests. She created Black women's groups. And what was really interesting, this story really stuck out, that really showed you what sort of woman she was. When she was born in 1953, she was born in Jamaica. She moved to London with her family when she was 9. Few years later, when she was 16, she noticed a police car beating up a man. The police were beating up a man from Nigeria, and they thought that this Nigerian man had stolen a car, but he wasn't. He didn't. He was an important diplomat. So 5'2", tiny Olive Morris came to try and stop the police from attacking this diplomat. So the police, they turned on her. They arrested her, they assaulted her, they kicked her in the chest. Like I said, imagine she's 5'2" and she's trying to take on the police to help defend somebody else. She didn't think about her own safety. She couldn't just stand by and allow injustice of an African man to happen, or any man. So she stood up for him. And because of that, she was physically assaulted. She was racially abused by the police, arrested, jailed, her and 6 other people. She was fined £10. It doesn't sound like a lot now, but it was. And she was given a 3-month suspended jail sentence. But what she showed us was that you have to stand up to injustice, okay? She was punished for it, but her bravery was what showed us how we should always help people in need. And like I said, she died when she was only 27, and she's buried in Streatham Vale Cemetery, which you're all free to go and have a look at if hopefully she's encouraged you in some way. Now, this part is just a little bit of a Q&A, and because of time, I'm going to keep it very short. So if you've got anything, you can just write it in the chat, but we're not going to have the question bit where I'm going to hear from you. So any questions, just write it in the chat, and then we're going to move on.
Okay, Miss, I'll just read this out. Augustine said that the first Black Briton demanded a pay rise from Henry VIII, and he gave it to her. Maybe, I think he's referring to a woman who demanded a pay rise. Also, Yassine said, did you know that a Black Muslim Indian man was Queen Victoria's favorite servant, and then he became an Arabic teacher? And I think a lot of them are talking about the bravery that these women have displayed throughout history.
Yeah, really good points. That's something I'm going to have a look at. That's a great tale about the Queen and her favorite servant. I'll have a look. Thank you for sharing. Right, let's move on then, boys. This is our next lady. I've chosen her. Her expertise is law, okay? And her name's Linda Dobbs, and she's now a dame, actually. So she's been recognised by the Queen. And she had a very successful career as a lawyer, and she became the first non-white judge in the High Court in the UK. And for 20 years, she's been training other people on how to be lawyers and judges. I mean, phenomenal. And she has 7 doctorates, and she's often on the list of the Power 100. So that's the most influential Black Britons. And she said her advice is to always know your strengths and weaknesses. She said that she faced so much prejudice in her early career from people that she worked with to the clients, the people that she was there to help. And because she's a woman and she's Black, so she's a double minority. And she said she'd turn up for her cases and they'd say, I don't want her. And she says, it was never very good for my self-esteem, but I learned to not take offense. I could stamp my feet and make a fuss, or I could put my head down, work hard and prove my worth. I decided to do the latter. And if you look at the sort of things that she's involved in terms of law, professional ethics, judicial ethics, human rights, corruption, drug trafficking, money laundering. I mean, if I was intelligent enough, that would probably be my top job. Yeah, how interesting. She travels all over the world to train people on how to do this job. Phenomenal. Okay, next, let's move on to STEM. So we've got this lady, Maggie Pocock, another one who's been honoured by the Queen for her services to science. And Maggie, difficult childhood too. She went to 13 different schools, boys. She had dyslexia. Yeah, there are some people in our school who suffer from this. And still, she didn't give up. When she told her teacher that she wanted to be an astronaut, her teacher went, maybe you should think about nursing. I mean, how patronizing is that? Yeah. And she didn't give up. She went one day in secondary school, her teacher asked her a question about science and nobody in the class knew the answer. And she thought, hang on, I know this. So she put her hand up and she was the only person who not only knew the answer, but she was the only person who got it right. Okay. And she says that that was a complete turnaround. So in her science lessons, she started paying attention and she worked her socks off. She left school with 10 GCSEs and 4 A-levels in maths, physics, chemistry and biology. She is now a lead scientist at Astrium, and her job there is to look at observation instruments on satellites, measuring wind speeds to help investigate climate change. I mean, phenomenal. She's given presentations to almost 250,000 people from around the world. And her aim in life, she says, is to bring out the scientist in everyone. She even has her own show on the BBC. Okay, and this is a woman who is dyslexic and went to 13 different schools. Now, in the chat, what you can do is imagine that teacher who basically hinted that she wasn't good enough to ever work in science. Can you imagine what that teacher would say now? So you can write that in the group chat. What do you think? I think there'll be a deep sense of regret there. Let's look at our next STEM lady. And this is Dr. Anne-Marie Imafidon. Now, she comes from a family of geniuses, and I don't know if you get this PowerPoint afterwards, but I've put the link in there. It's about a short 3-minute video of her brother and sister who did their degrees at 11. I mean, they're super, super smart. But she is a prodigy in every sense of the word. She passed 2 A-level exams in maths and science at 11. At 13, in 2003, she won a scholarship to study maths at Johns Hopkins University. At 15, she was admitted onto a degree program at Oxford. Oh, it's gone, the slides move, sorry. At 17, she did her master's degree. And at 19, she became the youngest ever graduate of a master's degree. She speaks 6 languages. So guys, that is an achievement. 19 years old, she did her master's degree, okay? A lot of people are starting their undergraduate degrees at 19, okay? So she's worked with Goldman Sachs, Hewlett-Packard, Deutsche Bank. She has 5 doctorates and she's now the CEO of a company called STEMETS. And that's to get more young girls into STEM subjects. So, like I said, this runs in her family. Her brother and sister are also child geniuses, but she worked really hard. You don't just learn 6 languages like that. You don't just wake up and speak them. She's had to really put the effort in. And I'm going to end with this girl, modern, Lavinia Stennett. And she was born in 1996. And she is the CEO of the Black Curriculum. Now, we started with her when she was talking to us a little bit about the Ivory Bangle Lady. So I think it's nice to end with her. She's the youngest in this too. Lavinia's definition of leadership. So when she was at university, her teacher asked her, what does leadership mean to you? And she said, it's when a person acknowledges that there is a problem and takes the initiative to fix it. And that's exactly what she spent her life doing. Her plan is to reinvigorate the curriculum. She wants you to learn about all of this. She says that the curriculum is too narrow. She wants to ensure that Black history isn't omitted. Omitted means cut out, left out. She wants us to learn about art history, migration, politics, the legal system, land, the environment, And I, for one, absolutely agree with her. Who thinks, just write your answers in the group chat, yes or no. Who thinks that this is what you should be learning at school alongside everything else? I absolutely do. So she said, just going to end with her quote, Black people were here during the Roman times, and there is archaeological evidence of that. Unfortunately, I didn't learn this myself until I was at university. Wow. Our resources, our blood, our sweat has built the UK economy as we know it today. And at just 23 years old, she is a very inspirational woman. And she says, I believe in the power of education and the arts to ultimately transform the lives of people. Okay, so boys, I really hope that you have gained something from this and the women that we've learnt about. I mean, when I was researching this, there was so much that I'm ashamed to admit I didn't know. Yeah. And I think that's exactly why I don't want any of you to wait until you're in your 30s to learn about the contributions of Black people. You need to know it now. So this assembly's been about celebrating our unsung Black heroes. These women's lives were defined by their courage and their resilience and their intelligence and their grace, and it's paved the way for Black Brits of today. So as you can see, Black history exceeds slavery and colonialism. That's just one tiny part of it. We've done it all and more. And these were only a tiny, tiny few of what else we could have learned in 45 minutes. So take your learning further, and why not research some of these women that I've put on the screen? Which one of them pioneered the Notting Hill Carnival? Which one of them is an English composer, conductor and violinist? Yeah, keep learning, keep reading, keep their history alive, because like I said at the start, Black history is British history. Okay, so thank you all for listening. We have about 5